get underway with the course, starting with a course overview. So with regard to hoarding, we're going to teach you three main things here. You'll learn the difference between a hoarder and a collector. You'll learn why it happens, and you'll learn how many people do it. You'll also learn the 5 different levels of hoarding. You'll learn how to identify which level you're working on. You'll learn when to clean and when to restore and when it's best to just settle. And we'll talk about the success rate for each level. And when we refer to success rate, what we're actually talking about here is your ability to quickly and accurately settle these claims. And one of the things I'd like to convey today is that there is a prevailing mindset out there that hoarders do not cooperate. But one of the things I'd like you to walk away from this training knowing is that that's not necessarily true. And we'll dig into that a little bit today. So starting with the difference between a collector and a hoarder, guys, the biggest difference here is that the collector is organized and strategic in the way that they collect. They may have 300 Barbie dolls, but they know exactly what they have. And I can actually attest to that. My wife, Heather, while she maybe doesn't have 300 Barbie dolls, she has a lot of them. And she takes great pride in these, and they're all in their original box. And she's got Romeo and Juliet Barbie, and she's got Hawaii Barbie, and on and on and on. And she's got a little area of our house where she displays all of this. Somebody that doesn't know her might look at this and say, oh my gosh, look at that clutter. But to her, it's organized, it's important, and it's something that she cares about greatly. And that's a huge difference between that and a hoarder. And when it comes to a hoarder, it's not managed. And that is the key. They've accumulated so much that their home is no longer functional. And that's according to Dr. Robin Zazo, who's a clinical psychologist and an expert in OCD and compulsive hoarding. She's also the expert that you see on the show, for anybody that's seen the show out there. So let's talk about how many hoarders are out there. And interestingly enough, the answer to that question depends on who you ask. There's a prevailing study out there that says there are 15 million hoarders in the country. And there's another one, that happens to be the one that is the expert panel for the show, says there's 3 million. So who's right? Is it the 15 million or is it the 3 million that's in the show? Well, the answer is that it's 15 million. But the difference is because 3 million of the 15 million have an elevated disease called extreme hoarding or compulsive hoarding. Now, prior to the show in 2013, all hoarders were kind of put in the same bucket there. But this show has changed all of that. So depending, there's a lot of different opinions on the show, and some people feel like it objectifies these folks who are really suffering. But on the positive side, it has brought so much attention to this disease, and with that attention comes money and resources and help. So it's actually done a lot of good to help these people that suffer from this. Of the 15 million, there's another group, about 8.5 million, that have some level of OCD. And then there's the lower 25%, about 3.5 million, that are just undiagnosed. So some of the contributors that lead to hoarding are stress, anxiety, and guilt. And the reality is we all have to deal with these emotional aspects of just life. It's part of the human condition. But it's how we deal with it that really is the differentiator. For some people, it's stress cleaning. And when I talk about that, it reminds me of my mom. This was her approach. And when I was a kid, when my brother and I would hear that vacuum kick on, we knew, oh gosh, mom's working through something. For others, and this includes myself, it could be running, or maybe others going to the gym. We've all been under a lot of stress lately with all of the changes in our world related to COVID. And for me, just going outside to get some fresh air and go for a run has been an absolute saving grace. And that's how I've coped with stress. And maybe to an onlooker, they say, oh, well, that looks nice. I should get out and get some exercise too. But the random onlooker has no idea what I might be dealing with, and that running is actually a way that I'm processing things and dealing with some of these real emotions. For others, it's going out to have a drink, and obviously there's nothing wrong with going out to have the occasional drink and maybe deal with stress that way on a one-off basis. But the bigger issue is when people lean on that on a regular basis, so that every time they're feeling stressed, they reach for that bottle. And that is something that is and can be progressive. But there are many out there, like the functioning alcoholic, that are able to hide that. So while an individual may be dealing with their stress, anxiety, or guilt in that unhealthy way, you may never know it. And most importantly, and for the purposes of today's training, another way people deal with this is they shop and shop and shop, and that is very destructive. And the biggest difference with that, unlike the stress cleaning or going to a gym or having a drink, with the material accumulation that goes along with this retail therapy, that stress you can see, and it's on display for everyone. Okay, we're going to be moving along here in a second. I hope you remember what the dead air means. Next, we're going to talk about the ages of hoarders. Interestingly enough, it can actually start very young. It can start as early as the teenage years. And you wonder why that might be the case, but the reality is that teenagers suffer from stress, anxiety, and guilt. So it is something that can impact them, but nowhere near to the extent that it impacts people between the ages of 55 and 94. In fact, they're 3 times more likely to hoard than those between the ages of 34 and 44. And the reason for this, you got to think, why is that the case? But it has everything to do with what they're going through at that age. It could be children moving away, a stressor, and maybe this is how they're coping with that. It could be retirement. That's a big one. I remember my dad, when he retired, his job was a big part of his identity, and there was a real struggle after that. How is one going to cope with that? It could be divorce. Maybe people were staying together for the kids. Now the kids are gone and everything changes. Or it could be the death of a loved one. These are terribly stressful circumstances in one's life, and it could be material accumulation is the way in which they start to deal with that stress to make that pain go away. Another thing to consider is that this disorder takes years to develop because it is progressive and it is something that gets worse over time. And people don't normally go from a level 1 to a level 5 overnight. It takes not just years to develop, but what's the one other thing? It takes money. So when you have the time and the money and the stressors of life, this is where if these emotions aren't dealt with in a healthy way, in a constructive way, it can start to manifest in this dynamic. Hoarding in America, it is serious, and unfortunately, it's only getting worse, and it's getting worse at a very, very rapid pace. And think about why that might be the case. If you were to put your finger on something, what would be the #1 reason why it's getting worse? It has everything to do with technology and online shopping. Because at least in the past, there is a direct relationship between the hoarding disease and the social connectivity in one's life. And in the past, if you wanted to go out and go shopping, you had to get out of the house, go to the mall, go to Walmart, wherever it may be, and put forth that effort. Now, you can accumulate from the comfort of your home, from the comfort of your couch with your smartphone, and you can do it in 5 seconds. So that's one of the major contributors as to why this is getting worse and worse over time. And then as you look at what people are collecting, they're collecting clothes, they're collecting books. And you think about clothing, and that one actually makes sense. Clothing oftentimes is very emotionally charged, and there's a lot of sentimental significance behind clothing. But you wonder why books. But then if you really start to think about that, you think about the age group that we're dealing with. A lot, for the most part, it's people over 55 years old. And they didn't grow up in the YouTube age. And you think back to maybe what was life like back in 1975? Well, they relied on books for information. And there can also be sentimental significance associated with books and the collection of as well. All right, time for a poll question. So I'm going to navigate, let me open up the toolbar here and see if I can effectively launch this poll. Just bear with me, folks. If I run into any technical difficulties, let me know. Okay, hold on. And we're launching. And to my panelists out there, send me a text. Just let me know that you're able, or speak up and let me know if you're able to see the poll.
It's there, Chris. Thanks.
Wonderful. And actually, I can see the responses coming in. So good job to everybody out there. And I'm happy to say, as I look at the attendee list, we're at 137, which means out of the 138 that registered, we've got a fantastic attendance rate today. And again, I'm just very happy that you've all given us this hour of your day. Wonderful. It looks like the vast majority of you have put the correct answer of 55 to 94 years old. So very, very good. We're now going to close this poll in just a second here. Again, it's very important that you answer the poll as well, because it does register. Everybody that answered the poll question will receive credit for that, that acknowledgement that you are in fact participating in today's training. So we're going to close this poll in another 10 seconds. Again, we've got just a few more votes. Looks like we've had about, I want to say 90% of people have voted, so pretty good. And we're going to close that poll. All right, very good, everyone. Now I'm going to minimize my toolbar, and we're going to continue on to what causes hoarding and its compulsions. Now, hold on, folks. Let me make sure that my connection is still good. Okay, excellent. So as it relates to what causes hoarding and compulsions, the reality is it can be, is it nature, is it nurture? It can be something that you inherit from your parents. It could also be as a result of the environment that you're raised in. You could develop addictions that way as an example of what you saw growing up. So while there isn't a lot of, really it's a relatively, studying this is a relatively new area, but there is a commonality with something that has been studied for years and years and years, and that is addiction behavior. And they've found a lot of similarities as to the hoarding compulsion and how that relates to addiction behavior, which bottom line is just coping with the past trauma. But in this case, it's shopping. So what causes hoarding compulsions? Are they born with it, or is it a learned condition? We can be born with a predisposition to hoarding, but there is some uncertainty as to how strong that link is. Remember, they've only been studying it since 2013, so currently the evidence is inconclusive. But again, because of the parallels to addiction behavior, we have been able to learn as a result of making that connection. So the Mayo Clinic has looked into this significantly, and they weighed in on what their findings have been. And everything that they've seen points to a learned behavior. So family history, definitely an association there. Stressful life events, as we talked about before, absolutely. But more than anything else, if you remember one thing from this slide, I want you to take away the fact that what the Mayo Clinic found is that most people who have the hoarding disorder have a temperament that includes indecisiveness. And this is so important as it relates to adjusting a claim. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to ask that hoarder to get a list together for you. Because it doesn't matter if you need it in 2 weeks, you won't get it in 6 months. They're indecisive. And for that reason, really taking control over the direction of that claim is going to help lead to the best results possible. So now let's get into the 5 levels of hoarding. And with that, the biggest challenge today is to get you to think about hoarders in a different way and to not have you associate them with what you've seen on TV. So there is a spoiler here. Of the 5 levels of hoarding, you will only be involved in 3. So next time you hear, I think the insured may be a hoarder, take a breath, calm down. There may be a better way forward than what you've thought in the past. So let's talk about a level 4. This is one that you won't be involved in. And let's dig into that a little bit. A level 4 hoarder lives within 15 feet of their chair. A level 5 hoarder, their condition has gotten so bad that there's no longer room in the house. They're now living in their car. Both of these are extreme diagnosed hoarder's disease. And they're the 2 that you won't be handling. Their mental state has deteriorated so much that they're not paying their bills. And if they're not paying their bills, they're not paying for their insurance. So that's the key there. And think back to the show. And again, I haven't seen every episode, but I've seen a lot of them. And I can't recall a single time I've ever seen an adjuster. Now, could there be an exception? Of course. There's an exception to almost everything in life. Maybe a family member is paying bills on their behalf, but again, it will be extremely rare. So let's talk about the levels that you will encounter. Level 1, your very first clue that you're dealing with a level 1 hoarder is that the garage, basement, or attic is totally full. But there is a path to walk through the house. So that's your clue on a level 1. As you get inside, all doors and stairways are accessible. And maybe outside of some cigarette smoke, there really isn't a strong odor. The house is still considered safe and sanitary. They're even somewhat aware of their situation. As you get into their living space, there's a lot of clutter, but it isn't totally interfering with their living space. Again, they have some self-awareness here, so they might even make jokes about the fact that they know they have too much stuff. They might even show that they're annoyed with themselves because they know deep down they shouldn't be living like this. But the most important thing to know about a level 1 is that they will work with you. Level 2, clutter is now in the living space. And this is really that 8.5 million people with that diagnosed level of OCD. They're not extreme hoarders like a 4 and a 5, but the disease is starting to progress. So you have limited evidence of house cleaning, light odor throughout the home, and the key, the one thing I want you to remember about a level 2, one exit is now blocked. And as you get deeper into this, you'll see noticeable shopping addictions, maybe shoes, packages and clothing from department stores, from their online shopping, buying the same item for gifts and relatives and friends. Maybe they just never got around to sending them. I won't go into too much detail, but this is something I can also relate to on a personal level as well. As far as what's going on with the level 2 insured, the OCD is advancing. They're starting to withdraw. They are embarrassed about the situation. They are still employed, so they're still paying their bills. They're concerned about their personal hygiene. As it relates to how workable they'll be, the studies have shown about 75% of the time they're generally reachable, but they're going to require more motivation to act. So an adjuster or first responder definitely needs to recognize that the insured is going to need help. So let's talk about working with your contractors on an assignment where you have a level 2. Communication is key. So the first line of action is to have a pre-meeting with your contractors and your service providers. You are a trained professional and you need all of those service providers that act as an extension of you to behave in the same way. They need to know how to handle this. They need to understand the dynamic and know how to speak with the policyholder. Never, ever have them say anything like your house is cluttered, messy, unsanitary. Those contractors, to the best of your ability, you've got to try to remove them if they're not complying. You need to be empathetic, absolutely, because that sets the stage, but you've got to be firm. At the end of the day, you're not their psychologist, and you're not going to be able to help the vast majority of people with their mental condition. You have one job, and that is to settle the loss and to do it in the fastest, most accurate, most fair way possible. Now let's talk about a level 3. One of the things that you'll see on a level 3, this is where you have at least one room in the house that you can't even get into. You may have to physically crawl or climb on a pile just to see what's in a room. And the room, it's no longer usable. So this is when you know you're on that level 3. So they will basically have one bedroom, the kitchen, one bathroom, and that's it. And oftentimes, you'll even have a situation like this where, yes, they're sleeping on the couch. They have so much stuff, not even their bed can be used. When you have a situation like this, the number one thing to remember is your health. You have got to remember that safety is your responsibility. It's all of our responsibility. So you've got to have at your disposal that Tyvek suit, the respirator, disposable gloves, shoes, boots, footwear, goggles, a hard hat even, alcohol wipes, and disinfectant spray. On these losses, it can get so bad where you have things that maybe you don't even see right away. And I'm talking about things like fleas. And this, not just for an adjuster that has to set foot on a level 3, but the contractors as well. So if you're an adjuster without the proper equipment, you might bring those fleas back into your home. That's horrible. Or even worse, I don't even want to say even worse, but equally as important, your service provider, if they don't have the proper gear, what if they bring those fleas back to their facility and they cross-contaminate other claims? A huge problem. So everybody on the same page as it relates to safety. And the best way to approach this for everybody is just have that little emergency kit in the back of your vehicle, because you never know what you're going to run into. And sometimes you have a situation where you hear, oh yeah, it's not so bad. Or you just get limited information. You get out there and you realize you've got a lot more on your hands than you anticipated. So that a little emergency kit in the back of your car is very, very important. All right, so level 3, these insureds can be the most challenging. Their OCD level has really progressed. They're not cleaning the house or themselves regularly. You've got a strong odor throughout the house, And again, they're starting to withdraw from society. So they may not have much human validation. They may be getting it in large part from the animals in their life. And this is where I know it may sound a little weird, but it's not uncommon to have a situation where they have 6 cats or 6 dogs, and do not underestimate how important those animals might be in their life. And we're going to come back to this in a minute, but that dynamic is something that can be very, very important as it relates to settling this claim. But remember, as bad as it is, they're still paying their bills. They're still, again, much like the functioning alcoholic, doing the bare minimum as it relates to their responsibilities. But most importantly, on a level 3, get an advocate. So this may be a relative, a pastor, or a friend of the insured. If you do this, you might have a 50-50 chance of adjusting that claim. Okay, so with that, we're going to launch our second poll question. All right, we should have it up on the screen. Please be sure to answer that poll question. And Steve, if you can hear me, just let me know that it's showing up on the screen correctly.
Looks good.
Excellent. Wow, this is great. We've already got 47%, 49% of people have voted. Thank you. We're going to allow a little bit more time. It's very important to vote. And it looks like most people are getting, 99% of everybody is getting the answer correct. So thank you for paying attention. We're at 60% voted. We'll leave this up for another 15 seconds here. Okay, we're going to shut it down and close the voting in 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you, everybody. And again, it looks like we had 99% correct on that poll question. So thank you very, very much. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about how we move forward on a level 3 loss. So, number 1, let's say they want it restored and they have enough coverage. What do? Restore everything. Why? Because they've made a decision. And remember, that's the number 1 component of the hoarding condition, is that they're indecisive. So if they've made a decision that if there's adequate coverage, and that's the direction that they want to go, you're fortunate. They've made a decision. Count your blessings, and let's move on to quickly close this claim. Number 2, they insist on a settlement. That's fine. Settle. Just do not pay replacement cost for the items that are restorable. That's the key. You don't ever want to pay full replacement if that's not what is required. This is where a cleaning cost settlement can really, really help. Number 3, there isn't enough coverage. This is where you need that advocate. You've all done claims where there isn't enough coverage. This is not a good time, and you're going to need all the support you can get. So that is by far going to be your most difficult claim. So let's talk about this. When there is not an adequate level of coverage, this is where the claim can go sideways, and it can take a long time to close. Remember, your insured's mental state is deteriorating, and their ability to reason may not be all that it should. So it's the advocate's job to work with the insured to find out what they need and what can be thrown away. But keep in mind, that environment can be very, very chaotic. So one of the solutions in this could be to get these items out of that crazy environment and into a controlled environment like a restoration facility, where a service provider can pack these out, organize them, and this can really help the decision-making process. The reality is that 25% of people actually recover from this, and this could be that opportunity. This could be that theoretical rock bottom where they finally say, I don't want to live like this anymore. So when you have a controlled environment like this, the insured can approach it in a stabilized, organized way, go through their belongings in an orderly fashion with their advocate, decide what they want to keep, what they want to discard. And this is especially important if there's a coverage limitation. Another option is to consider on-site storage, but this is one where I have another personal experience where my wife and her brother went out to her dad's house, and he probably would qualify as a level 1. His garage is 100% packed to the gills. You could not walk through it. You couldn't fit one more thing into it. But the house, definitely pathways, definitely functional inside. But they said, Dad, we're going to help you. So they got it wasn't a pod like this, but it was a dumpster. And they spent an entire weekend, all day Saturday and all day Sunday, clearing out all of that stuff in the garage, and they put it into the, it was, again, like a 20-yard dumpster that was parked in the driveway. And when they woke up on Monday morning, they found that her dad, my father-in-law, had gone out into the dumpster and taken half of the stuff that was in there and put it right back in the garage. So the key is, if you're going to get a pod, the biggest question to ask is, who controls the key? And if you have any say over it, it should not be the policyholder. Okay, everybody, we're going to keep moving here. Remember what the dead air means, and away we go. Let's talk about some conversation strategies to get the claim moving in the right direction. Just an example, but this type of thought process can be helpful. So it could be something along the lines of, Ms. Johnson, remember, going into this conversation, you want to approach it with the mindset that they're going to be indecisive. So we need your leadership as the adjuster to move this claim forward. And you might say something like, the estimate to clean everything shows that your policy is coming up a little short on coverage. But we found one way, and yes, only give them one way, that I can make your coverage work for you. You're going to dispose of these items over here in this pile. And if we do that, everything else will work. And then you might close with, your pets are anxious to get things back to their old life. Remember what we talked about, how their relationships with people, their validation may be diminishing, and the importance of those animals in their life, that might be the only reason that they're paying their policy. So let's use that as motivation to get things back on track, not just for them, but for the people or animals that they care about. So when they want a settlement, restorable, absolutely best way to go if that is an option and if there's coverage. Replacement is certainly an option, but remember, if you go the way of replacement, it's 4 to 5 times more expensive than restoration. So remember, exercising patience at the beginning of the claim will actually save you a tremendous amount of time. And not only that, it sets the groundwork for how the rest of the claim is going to go. So patience is a virtue, and it's actually the key to setting the right tone on these assignments. One of the things that can be so important to get the claim moving in the right direction is to offer that emergency rush order, to start talking about the things that are most important to them. Let's get them restored. Let's get them back in their hands to prove to them that restoration is possible. And they get these items back in 24 to 48 hours. So again, a great way to move the claim forward, provide a great service, and prove that restoration is possible. Remember, it's going to be a slow process. Verifying coverage is key. The other key is that content and mitigation companies work together. When you look at this picture here on the right-hand side, you see a lot of different categories involved here, not just books, but textiles and artwork and draperies and a zillion different things. And we do not want redundancy. We want ownership and teamwork and collaboration. So again, having that huddle up, not just at the onset of the claim with your service providers, but perhaps on a regular interval as this claim moves forward might not be a bad idea. And then that way, everybody is on the same page to work through this claim towards closure. One of the things that we recommend is to make a schedule by room and set realistic goals. One of the best ways to do it is just take it by room basis. If we can get one room done per day, that could be a huge win. So some people might ask, why restore anything in a given house? But the reality is that you're not dealing with level 4s and 5s 99% of the time. And on level 1, 2, and 3, a lot of the clothing could be in really good condition. So contrary to popular belief, it's not all junk. And again, you shouldn't pay replacement costs for something that is in fact restorable. Just in terms of anticipating how the claim goes, a lot of times what we see on these assignments is the need for partial deliveries. So it's just good and healthy to anticipate that that's something that we'll need to do in order to keep that claim moving. So in summary, I hope you learned a little bit about the different levels of hoarders today. Remember to give them support and respect. They might just need some positive prodding. Assume that they do want to get back to their daily lives, that they are still paying for their insurance on their home. So we all have an obligation to this customer to treat them fairly, and also an obligation to the stipulations of the policy to pay them what's owed, no more, no less, and to do it in the shortest amount of time possible. And then remember that restoration is possible on all 3 levels, provided that they have enough coverage. And then last but not least, on level 3, remember to get an advocate. Wow, we did really good on time. I actually have 50 minutes in 20 seconds on my timer, so that's really good. Questions on the poll questions. It looks like we had quite a few on those. In fact, it looks like we had so many. I'm thinking it will be best to take those offline and to follow up individually, which is good anyways. And again, for all of you that if you do these in the future, just remember that chat feature because it is really helpful. And we do enjoy following up with you in a targeted way. Just a little bit of housekeeping to ensure that everybody receives credit for today's training. You've got to return that remote acknowledgement form within 5 days of this training. We'll need that, your license number and the 2 codes that we shared with you throughout today's presentation. I will send out an email by the end of business today to everybody that attended. So just look for that email and that will have the remote acknowledgement form attached. And of course, please remember our contact info. Again, I am the National Account Manager for everything Allstate and Encompass. So write down my phone number, my email. If you have any questions or if you need anything from me, please let me know. And more, maybe more, not more important than the credit, but feedback. We know we can always do better. I love great feedback. I love constructive feedback. So please let me know what you thought of today's presentation. And please also let me know if you'd be interested in more classes like this in the future. So with that, thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate your time today. I thank you so much. We thank you for your partnership, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the afternoon.